A poor farmer found a lost little girl in his snowy field. Not knowing she was the daughter of a billionaire, he took her home. What happens next changes both of their lives forever. The wind howled across the snowy fields, whipping against Jack Matthews' weathered face as he trudged through his farm. The sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky in orange tones that stood out dramatically against the pristine white of the snow. His seasoned eyes surveyed the damage left by the last storm, mentally calculating how much it would cost his already tight budget. That was when he heard it. A sound so out of place in that vast white landscape that at first he thought he was imagining things. A sob, delicate, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably human. Jack stopped, his heart pounding as he strained to listen. The wind kept up its incessant howling, but between its gusts there it was again, the muffled crying of a child. "Is anyone there?" His raspy voice cut through the cold air. The crying stopped for a moment, followed by a louder sob. Following the sound, Jack crossed a small field until he reached an area where the snow had piled up against an old fence. There, partially buried in the snow, was a little girl. She couldn't be older than 5, wearing a coat far too thin for such unforgiving weather, her blonde hair dusted with snow, her small hands red from the cold. "My God," Jack muttered, approaching cautiously so as not to scare her any more than she already was. The girl lifted her large, frightened blue eyes toward him. Her face was red from the cold and from tears. "Hi there, little one," he said, crouching to her level. "Are you hurt?" The girl just stared at him, trembling violently. Without hesitation, Jack took off his own coat, wrapping her in the rough but warm fabric. As he did, his mind involuntarily drifted back 15 years when he still had a family of his own. Claire's laughter echoed through the house as she chased little Tommy down the hallway. "Daddy, catch him!" she shouted, pretending not to catch up with the 3-year-old who ran on his chubby legs. Jack smiled, joining in the fun until the coughing started. First Claire, then Tommy. The pneumonia took his family in less than a month, leaving him alone with a mortgaged farm and a shattered heart. Shaking his head to dispel the memories, Jack turned his attention back to the girl. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Emily," she whispered between chattering teeth. "Emily," Jack repeated gently. "I'm Jack. Can you tell me how you got here?" Emily shook her head, more tears freezing on her cheeks. "I don't know," she sobbed. "I want to go home." "Where's home? Your parents must be worried." Once more, Emily just shook her head, looking lost and confused. Jack glanced around, but there was only snow as far as the eye could see. No abandoned car, no footprints apart from his own. It was as though the girl had simply materialized there. The sun was setting quickly now, and the temperature kept dropping. Jack knew he had to make a decision. Leaving her there was out of the question. She'd freeze within hours. The nearest town was a 40-minute drive, and his old pickup was barely running. His house, on the other hand, was only a 10-minute walk away. "Emily," he said softly, "it's getting too cold out here. How about we head to my house? We can warm you up, get you something to eat, then figure out how to get you home. Does that sound good?" Emily hesitated, her blue eyes studying Jack's face with surprising intensity for someone so young. Finally, she nodded slightly. "Can I carry you? Your little legs must be tired from all this cold." Another small nod, and Jack carefully lifted her. She felt icy and weighed less than she should, making his heart clench. Adjusting the coat around her, he started trudging back home, his thoughts whirling with worry and unanswered questions. Jack's house was small and old, but well kept, the kind of place that makes up for its simplicity with character. A thin column of smoke rose from the chimney, promising the warmth they both needed. As they approached, Jack couldn't help but notice how Emily sat up straighter in his arms, her eyes wide as she took in the sight of the house. "Is this where you live?" she asked, her voice still trembling. "Yes," Jack answered, climbing the porch steps. "It's not much, but it's cozy." As they entered, the heat from the fireplace enveloped them at once. Jack gently placed Emily in his favorite armchair near the fire, then went to fetch some blankets. When he returned, he found her glancing around curiously, her gaze wandering over the wooden walls, the worn but clean furniture, the old photos in simple frames. "Here," he said, wrapping her in 2 layers of blankets. "I'll make you some hot chocolate. Do you like hot chocolate?" For the first time, a small smile appeared on Emily's face. "With marshmallows?" Jack felt his own face soften. "Let me see if I still have some left." In the tiny kitchen, Jack moved mechanically, preparing the hot chocolate as his mind worked overtime. He needed to notify the authorities, of course, but first he had to make sure Emily was warm and fed. Searching the cupboards, he found an old bag of marshmallows, one of the few indulgences he occasionally allowed himself. He returned to the living room carrying 2 steaming mugs, topped with little white marshmallows. Emily took hers with both hands, carefully blowing on the hot drink. "Emily," Jack began, sitting on the edge of the couch near the armchair, "can you tell me anything else about your home or your family?" The girl took a sip of the hot chocolate, leaving a small brown mark above her upper lip. Her eyes drifted to the window where snow continued to fall gently. "I can't really remember," she said quietly, gripping the mug in her small hands. Jack nodded understandingly. "That's okay. How about we eat something? You must be hungry. I can make some eggs and toast. How does that sound?" Emily's face lit up a bit, and she nodded more enthusiastically. As Jack prepared the simple meal, his mind wandered between different scenarios. How had such a small child ended up in the middle of his field, leaving no trace behind? Why couldn't she remember her home or her family? After Emily had eaten, devouring the eggs and toast as if she hadn't seen food in days, Jack took her to Tommy's old room. The space had remained practically untouched for the past 15 years, serving more as a storage for memories than an actual bedroom. Quickly, he improvised a bed with clean sheets and extra blankets. "You can sleep here tonight," he said, helping her settle in. "Tomorrow morning, I'll go into town to find help to locate your family, okay?" Emily snuggled under the blankets, her eyes already heavy with sleep. "Thank you, Jack," she murmured drowsily. "Sleep well, Emily," he responded softly, closing the door. In the living room, Jack sank into his armchair, rubbing his calloused hands over his face. The day had started like any other during his last 15 years of solitude, and now here he was, with a lost child sleeping in his deceased son's room. Picking up the phone, he dialed the local police station. After several rings, a sleepy voice answered. "Pine Creek Police Station. Good evening, this is Jack Matthews from the Matthews Farm," he began, keeping his voice low. "I found a lost girl on my property today. She's no more than 5 years old." There was a sound of papers shuffling on the other end. "A lost girl? Let me check if we have any missing child report." "No, nothing in the past few weeks. You said you found her today?" "Yes, a few hours ago. She was alone in the middle of the snow, nearly frozen. I brought her inside to warm up." "Did she say anything about how she got there? About her parents?" "Not much. She seems confused. Can't remember clearly." The officer sighed. "Look, Jack, you did the right thing bringing her in from this cold. I'll file a report, and first thing tomorrow, I'll send a squad car out to you. I'll also contact social services. In the meantime, just keep her warm and safe." "All right," Jack replied, feeling an inexplicable pang in his chest at the thought of handing Emily over to the authorities. "I'll be waiting." After hanging up, Jack remained seated for a long time, watching the flames in the fireplace as they gradually subsided. The wind outside had picked up, whistling through the cracks of the old house. He stood to add more firewood, his eyes falling on one of the photos on the wall, him, Claire, and Tommy, smiling at a summer picnic that felt like it belonged to another life. 15 years of solitude had not been kind to Jack Matthews. Losing his family had left a void he never truly tried to fill, preferring to bury himself in the hard work of the farm, letting the days blend into one another in a lonely but familiar routine. Yet now, with a lost child in his care, something was beginning to stir in his chest, a sense of purpose he had long forgotten. As he prepared to sleep on the couch, near the room where Emily rested, Jack could never have imagined that his decision to save a little girl lost in the snow was about to change his life in ways he could never have foreseen. Outside, the snow kept falling silently, covering any tracks that might explain how Emily had ended up there. And as the night wore on, The mystery of her appearance was only just beginning to unfold. Time has a peculiar way of flowing when major changes happen in our lives. For Jack Matthews, the weeks following Emily's arrival at his farm seemed both a blink of an eye and an eternity. The harsh winter was starting to give way, and with it, the lonely routine that had defined his last 15 years was transforming into something entirely new and unexpected. Mornings at the Matthews farm now began with the sound of small, light footsteps on the wooden hallway floor. Emily had taken to waking up with the first rays of sunlight, something that still surprised Jack, who assumed children preferred to sleep in. She always chose the same spot to wait for him, the bench by the kitchen window, her little legs swinging in the air as she watched the world wake up outside. On that particular late winter morning, Emily was especially excited. The snow covering the fields was starting to melt, revealing dark patches of earth underneath. "Jack, look! The flowers are starting to appear," she exclaimed, pointing at the tiny green shoots sprouting near the window. Jack joined her, noting the early signs of spring. "They're crocuses," he explained. "They're always the first to pop up, even before the snow's completely gone." Emily absorbed this information with the seriousness she brought to everything Jack taught her about the farm. It was one of her most intriguing traits, her way of alternating between the spontaneous joy typical of her age and moments of an almost disconcerting maturity. Breakfast had turned into an elaborate ritual Jack never thought he would enjoy so much. He, who for years had been content with black coffee and toast, now found himself planning varied menus, determined to give Emily fun and nutritious meals. "Today we have special pancakes," he announced, skillfully pouring the batter into the pan to form what was supposed to be a rabbit. Emily leaned over the counter, watching intently. "It looks more like a bear," she commented diplomatically, her tone surprisingly refined for a child her age. Jack laughed. "Yeah, I think I need more practice. Want to try making the next one?" Her eyes lit up at the suggestion. Jack brought over a chair so she could reach the stove safely, and together they created a series of pancakes in increasingly creative shapes. Emily showed a natural talent for it, her small hands moving the ladle with surprising precision. "Where did you learn to cook so well?" Jack asked, watching her put the finishing touches on a perfectly round pancake. Emily frowned, wearing that familiar, confused expression. I don't know. I guess someone taught me before. It was always like this when the past came up. It was as if Emily's memories were shrouded in thick fog, with only occasional fragments coming to the surface. Jack had learned not to push her, gently changing the subject when he sensed her discomfort. The weeks had established a comfortable routine between them. After breakfast, Emily accompanied Jack in his chores on the farm, asking endless questions about everything she saw. Her genuine interest in the daily activities was touching, even when her questions hinted at a life quite different from the one she led now. "Why do you clean the barn by yourself?" she asked one morning, watching Jack work. "At the other house there were always lots of people doing things." Jack paused, leaning on his shovel. "Well, it's just the two of us here, and sometimes it's good to do things with our own hands." Emily considered this for a moment, then grabbed a small garden spade Sarah had brought for her. "Can I help too?" Jack's heart warmed at the gesture. "Of course you can, little one." It was during one of those mornings of working together that Sarah Thompson showed up at the farm. Their neighbor, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, had taken to checking on Jack occasionally ever since his family's death. Her blue sedan rattled up the dirt road to the house, raising a small cloud of dust along the way. "I heard in town that you had a visitor," Sarah said, her gaze quickly finding Emily, who was playing with some chickens in the yard. Emily looked up at the unfamiliar voice, and to both adults' surprise, stood gracefully, brushed her simple dress off with delicate gestures, and made a small curtsy. "Good morning, Mom," she said, her voice clear and polite. "I'm Emily." Sarah gave Jack a significant look before lowering herself to Emily's level. "Hello, dear. I'm Sarah. I live on the neighboring property." That meeting marked a significant change in the farm's routine. Sarah, a retired elementary school teacher, began visiting regularly, bringing books, games, and art supplies for Emily. Her presence allowed Jack to focus on tasks that required his full attention, while Emily had company and age-appropriate activities. It was through Emily's drawings that more clues about her past began to emerge. One particular afternoon, as Sarah supervised a little art session at the kitchen table, Emily produced an intriguing drawing. It was a house, or more accurately, a mansion, with details surprisingly specific for a 5-year-old. The paper showed an imposing building with tall arched windows, a grand staircase leading to the main entrance, and an elaborate garden with an ornamental fountain. The human figures in the drawing wore elegant outfits, and Emily had even included small details like chandeliers in the windows and luxurious cars in the driveway. "That's a beautiful place, Emily," Sarah said gently. Emily kept coloring, her tongue poking out in concentration. "It's where they have parties," she said absently, "with piano music and people dancing. The women wear dresses that sparkle when they twirl." Jack and Sarah exchanged looks. The description was far too detailed to be mere childhood fantasy. "Have you been to a party like that?" Jack asked, testing the waters. Emily paused for a moment, her face taking on that distant look that came when she tried to recall memories. "I think so. There was pretty music, and the lights were all golden." In the days that followed, more signs of Emily's mysterious background accumulated. Sarah had brought some old dresses for Emily to use as costumes, and the girl not only knew exactly how each piece should be worn, but also demonstrated surprising knowledge about fabrics and styles. "This one's cotton," she said, running her fingers over a blue dress. "It's good for warm days, but not suitable for formal occasions." "How do you know so much about clothes?" Sarah asked, fascinated. Emily shrugged, that characteristic gesture she made when she couldn't explain how she knew something. "I just do." A necessary trip into town revealed even more about Emily's enigmatic past. Pine Creek was a small town with just one main street that housed all the local businesses. For Jack, who only went there when absolutely necessary, it was more than enough. But Emily displayed a surprising familiarity with more sophisticated environments. In the local grocery store, while Jack picked up his usual basics, Emily navigated the aisles with impressive poise, her eyes scanning the shelves with polite interest. "Could we get some Belgian chocolates?" she asked, stopping in front of a small imported goods section. "And maybe some jasmine tea?" Jack and Sarah exchanged startled glances. It wasn't just the items Emily chose, but the way she carried herself, back straight, chin slightly raised, hands delicately clasped in front of her. For a moment, it was as though a little society lady had replaced the farm girl. It was in the checkout line that the most revealing moment occurred. Emily was idly flipping through a magazine when something completely captured her attention. It was an article about a charity gala at Henderson Mansion, a historic property on the other side of the state. The photo showed a sumptuous ballroom with crystal chandeliers and guests in formal attire. Emily's reaction was immediate and profound. Her small hands began trembling slightly as her fingers traced the contours of the ballroom in the photograph. Her blue eyes widened, fixed on some specific point in the image. "Emily," Jack asked gently, "do you recognize that place?" "It looks like the party house," she murmured distantly. "The chandeliers are similar, and the stairs too, but it's not the same one." "What do you mean, not the same?" Sarah asked softly. Emily kept studying the photo, a frown of concentration forming on her forehead. "The other house is bigger, and it has a special garden where the flowers look like they glow when it's dark." She touched the page again before looking at Jack. "But this isn't the house from the picture." Later, after Emily had gone to bed, Jack and Sarah spoke in low voices on the porch. The night was clear, and the stars shone brilliantly over the farm fields. "It can't be a coincidence," Sarah said thoughtfully. "The way she acts, the things she knows. Emily clearly comes from a very different background." Jack nodded, looking worried. "You saw how she behaved in the store, like a little princess. And that drawing of the mansion, with details too specific to be made up," Sarah added. "Jack, this girl must come from a very influential family." "That's what worries me," he admitted, running a hand over his tired face. "If her family is really powerful, what happens when they find her? How will they react to learning that a child of her social standing spent weeks on a simple farm?" "You saved her, Jack," Sarah said firmly. "You found a child nearly frozen in the snow and took her in. No one can blame you for that. It's not that simple, Jack argued. Rich, powerful people, they can twist things, make them look different from what they really are. What if they think I had something to do with her disappearance? Sarah placed a comforting hand on his arm. You've done everything right. You notified the authorities immediately. You've cared for her like your own daughter. Her voice trailed off on the last word, both of them aware of its weight. Jack hadn't been a father for 15 years, not since he lost Tommy. Now, in the span of a few weeks, he had become a father figure to a mysterious child who clearly came from a world so different from his. The sound of light footsteps in the hallway interrupted their thoughts. Emily appeared at the porch door, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest. "Can't sleep, little one?" Jack asked softly. Emily shook her head, her golden curls bouncing with the movement. "Can I sit with you for a bit?" Jack opened his arms, and Emily immediately ran into his lap, snuggling against his chest as she had done so many times over the last few weeks. In those moments, Jack felt more strongly than ever the bond that had formed between them, a bond that transcended social origins and mysterious circumstances. Sarah watched with a gentle smile, noticing how Emily fit perfectly in Jack's arms, as if that was exactly where she was meant to be. But her experienced eyes also took in the little details that made Emily so unique. The naturally graceful posture even when relaxed, the sophisticated vocabulary that occasionally slipped into her speech, the innate elegance in her simplest movements. "Look, a shooting star," Emily suddenly exclaimed, pointing at the sky. "Make a wish," Sarah suggested. Emily squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, then opened them again, a small smile on her lips. "Done." "Want to tell us what you wished for?" Jack asked. "You can't," she answered seriously. "If you tell, it won't come true. It's like tea etiquette. There are rules you have to follow." Once again, Jack and Sarah exchanged meaningful glances. "Tea etiquette?" Sarah asked softly. But Emily was already looking at the stars, apparently unaware of the importance of her casual statement. Jack held her a little tighter, feeling the bittersweet weight of the moment. Each day brought new revelations about Emily's past, and with them, the growing certainty that their time together might be more limited than he wished. The wind whispered through the fields of young wheat, carrying the sweet hint of approaching spring. Emily began humming softly, a complex melody that sounded like classical music, the kind you certainly wouldn't hear often on a farm. Somewhere out there, a family must be looking for her, a family likely with more resources and influence than Jack could imagine. And the more he grew attached to the little girl who had brought light back into his lonely life, the more he feared the inevitable moment when he would have to let her go. "I think it's time for someone to get back to bed," Sarah said gently, noticing that Emily was starting to nod off in Jack's arms. "Just a little longer," Emily mumbled sleepily, snuggling closer against Jack's chest. "Come on, little one," Jack said, carefully standing up with her in his arms. "Tomorrow we have to get up early to feed the chickens, remember?" "Miss Beatrice won't be happy if we're late," Emily agreed, referring to the hen she had named with surprising formality. Sarah watched as Jack carried Emily back inside, noticing how he had naturally resumed the role of a father, something she never expected to see after the tragedy that destroyed his family years ago. It was a remarkable transformation, but also a worrying one, given the mysterious circumstances surrounding Emily. After putting Emily to bed and making sure she was comfortably asleep, Jack returned to the porch. Sarah was still there, her expression thoughtful as she gazed at the stars. "You know it can't last forever," she said gently. Jack leaned against the porch railing, his eyes fixed on the dark fields. "I know," he answered in a low voice. "But I can't help wishing it could." The night silence was broken only by the distant chirping of a solitary cricket. In her room, Emily slept peacefully, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. In her dreams, images of two very different lives collided. Grand ballrooms with crystal chandeliers and cozy barns smelling of fresh hay, sparkling party dresses and simple aprons with pockets full of chicken feed, a mysterious mansion with lit gardens and a modest farm that stretched as far as the eye could see. And at the center of these contrasting memories was now the constant, reassuring figure of Jack, the gentle-hearted farmer who, unknowingly, had become exactly the protector she needed, even if their time together was as uncertain as the fog beginning to form over the slumbering fields. The Blackwood mansion stood imposing against the night sky, its windows aglow like watchful eyes, surveying the snow-covered gardens. Within its stone walls, the commotion never ceased, not even in the middle of the night. Security guards patrolled the grounds with flashlights, their beams dancing across the property like restless fireflies. In the main office, William Blackwood leaned over his mahogany desk, studying maps and reports spread across its polished surface. At 55, he possessed a natural air of authority, though in recent weeks his posture had bowed beneath the weight of worry. His eyes, usually sharp enough to catch the kind of details that made him one of the most successful businessmen in the country, now carried deep shadows. "Nothing," he muttered, pushing another report aside. "Absolutely nothing." On the couch by the fireplace, Olivia Blackwood looked up from her tablet, which displayed the latest news about their missing daughter. Like her husband, she showed clear signs of exhaustion. Her naturally elegant face was pale, and the usual impeccable bun had been replaced by a simple ponytail. Malcolm Richards, the most renowned private investigator on the East Coast, cleared his throat softly. "Mr. Blackwood, we've expanded the search to every major city within a 300-mile radius. We have teams at every airport, bus station, and port. And yet not a single lead," William said, running a hand through his graying hair. "How does a child simply vanish without a trace?" The disappearance itself was baffling in its simplicity. On a seemingly ordinary afternoon, Emily had been playing in the mansion's sunroom under the supervision of her nanny, Grace. In a matter of minutes, the time it took Grace to take an urgent phone call from her own daughter, Emily was gone. The security cameras, which covered nearly every inch of the property, had inexplicably failed during the crucial 15 minutes prior to Emily's disappearance. Immediate searches of the mansion's extensive grounds turned up nothing. It was as though Emily had evaporated. "Double the reward," William ordered, "from 2 to 4 million. "William," Olivia intervened, her voice trembling, "we've already tried that. It just attracts more—" "I know," he interrupted softly, "but I can't stop trying everything in our power." The media, of course, was having a field day with the story. Missing Blackwood heiress. Mystery at the mansion was just one of the milder headlines. Reporters camped outside the property gates day and night, cameras always ready to capture any movement or sign of a development. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Rachel Morgan, Olivia's younger sister, entered carrying a tray of tea. As always, she was impeccably dressed in a Chanel ensemble, her dark hair, so different from her sister's golden curls, perfectly styled. "I thought you might need something to drink," she said, placing the tray on a side table. "Olivia, dear, you barely touched your dinner." Olivia accepted the cup from her sister with a small nod of gratitude. Rachel had arrived at the mansion 2 weeks after Emily's disappearance, cancelling an important art exhibition in Paris to be with the family. "Any news?" Rachel asked, serving William a cup. "None," he replied bitterly. "It's like searching for a needle in a haystack." Rachel settled elegantly into an armchair. "Have you considered expanding the search to the West Coast?" Emily was always fascinated by the ocean. There are so many exclusive resorts in California. William and Olivia exchanged glances. It was true Emily had shown an interest in the sea, though they seldom traveled to the West Coast. "Malcolm?" William queried. The investigator jotted some notes on his tablet. "I can dispatch a few teams to check major resorts and tourist areas in California. Although, with the media exposure this case has—" "Someone would have recognized her," Olivia finished, her voice cracking. Rachel rose gracefully and walked to the window. Outside, the meticulously landscaped gardens lay under a blanket of snow, the ornamental fountains frozen into natural ice sculptures. The marble bench near the rose bushes, Emily's favorite spot for watching fireflies on summer nights, looked lonely and abandoned. "She's a Blackwood," Rachel said, her voice carrying a strange undertone. "Too clever for her own good, isn't that right, Olivia? So much like you at that age." Olivia shivered slightly at her sister's remark. There was something off in Rachel's tone, like a familiar melody played in the wrong key. "Rachel," she said softly, "are you okay? You seem—" "Of course I'm fine," Rachel replied too quickly. I'm just worried about my dear niece. And about you, naturally. I always worry about you, little sister. Malcolm observed the exchange with professional interest, making notes now focused on something quite different from the usual leads. Night wore on, and with it grew a sense of helplessness. Olivia left to stare out the window in her bedroom, eyes scanning the lit gardens where she had once spent so many hours playing with Emily. She must be so scared, Olivia whispered, voice trembling. My baby. She's never spent a single night away from home. William joined her at the window, wrapping an arm around her protectively. Rachel watched them with a complex expression, somewhere between concern and something else, an indefinable emotion that passed quickly over her face before being replaced by her usual mask of sympathy. I'll go see if the staff need anything, Rachel said, standing. Maybe call a few contacts in Paris. See if I can mobilize more resources for the search. After Rachel left, a heavy silence fell over the office. Malcolm continued making notes on his tablet, organizing the next steps of an investigation that, so far, had produced no concrete results. Outside, the snow began falling again, cloaking the Blackwood mansion gardens in a fresh blanket of white. In her room, Olivia would finally succumb to exhaustion, sleeping a restless sleep haunted by dreams of her little Emily, lost somewhere far away. Elsewhere in the mansion, Rachel Morgan walked the silent halls, her high heels echoing on the marble like a metronome, counting the seconds until all secrets were brought to light. Spring had come to the Matthews farm, turning the once snow-covered fields into a carpet of green grass and wildflowers. With the change of season came new routines and a deepening bond between Jack and little Emily. Nighttime, however, remained a challenge. On one particularly difficult night, Jack woke to the now familiar sound of Emily calling him. He got up from the couch, where he'd been sleeping since her arrival, and rushed to her room. Emily was sitting up in bed, her blue eyes wide with fear in the darkness, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. Jack didn't need to turn on the light to know that silent tears were streaming down her face. Hey, little one, he said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. Another nightmare. Emily nodded, throwing herself into his arms. Jack held her close, feeling her small heart pounding against his chest. Want to tell me about the dream? He asked gently, stroking her golden hair. It was dark, she murmured against his shirt, and cold. I was lost and couldn't find my way back. Jack hugged her tighter. You're not lost now. You're safe here with me. It was a scene that repeated often over the last few weeks. Emily's nightmares, though frequent, rarely contained specific details, always feelings of fear, cold, and disorientation. Dawn was breaking when Sarah arrived at the farm the next morning. She found Jack in the kitchen, fixing breakfast while Emily still slept. Another rough night, she asked, noting the circles under his eyes. Jack nodded, pouring coffee for both of them. Same nightmare as always. She gets so scared. Sarah. In the small living area next to the kitchen, the TV was on the morning news, its volume a mere murmur in the background. On the screen, a serious reporter was discussing the case that had captured the nation's attention, the mysterious disappearance of the Blackwood heiress. Photos of a 5-year-old girl with blonde hair and blue eyes filled the screen, showing her at social events in elegant dresses and formal poses. The search for little Emily Blackwood continues. The reward has been raised to $4 million for any information leading to... But Jack and Sarah, absorbed in their kitchen conversation, paid no attention to the television. Instead, they discussed ways to help Emily feel more secure. I've been thinking, Sarah said. Maybe we should create a more structured routine for her, something that grounds her. Together, they came up with a plan. Mornings would be dedicated to farm chores, with Emily helping Jack in ways appropriate for her age. Afternoons would be for calmer activities, drawing, reading, games. Evenings would have a special bedtime ritual. Emily loved the idea, especially helping Jack with farm tasks. Something about the predictability of farm work seemed to calm her, give her a sense of purpose and belonging. Look, Emily, Jack explained, as they planted sunflower seeds in small pots. Each seed has all the potential to become a magnificent flower. It just needs care, patience, and love to grow. Emily considered this seriously. her small hands dirty with soil as she carefully covered each seed. "Like how you take care of me." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "Yes, little one, just like I take care of you." It was during one of these lessons about farm life that it happened. Jack was showing Emily how to tell when tomatoes were ripe enough to pick, when she said something that changed everything. "Daddy, is this one good to pick?" The word slipped so naturally from her lips that Emily didn't seem to notice. But Jack froze, his heart hammering in his chest. It was the first time she'd called him that. Emily must have noticed his hesitation, because she turned to him with a worried expression. "Sorry, I didn't mean—" "No, no," Jack quickly said, pulling her into a hug. "You can call me that if you want to, little one. I'd be very happy." Later that night, after Emily had gone to sleep, Jack shared the news with Sarah. They sat in the living room, the TV still on in the background, but now tuned to some cooking show. "She called me Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It came out so naturally. As they talked, the show was interrupted by a special bulletin. Emily Blackwood's face filled the screen once again, along with images of the Blackwood mansion and its snowy gardens. The reporter spoke of new leads being investigated, showing clips of interviews with a devastated William and Olivia Blackwood. But Jack and Sarah, focused on their conversation on the other side of the room, failed to notice the broadcast. "It's no surprise," Sarah was saying. "You've been more of a father to her in these last months than anyone else in her life." "But that's just it, isn't it?" Jack said, rubbing his hand over his face. "Somewhere out there, she has a real family, parents who must be searching for her. And that worries you." "Of course it does," Jack admitted. "But at the same time, Sarah, I can't imagine my life without her now. I know it's selfish, but—" "It's not selfish to want to care for a child who clearly needs you," Sarah interjected. "You gave her a home, safety, love. That's never selfish." On the TV, the segment ended with a phone number for tips on the whereabouts of Emily Blackwood, but that glowing screen had long been forgotten, a mere bluish flicker dancing on the walls of the dim living room. "You really do want to raise her permanently, don't you?" Sarah asked softly. Jack looked at the stars starting to appear in the window. "More than anything," he admitted. "I know it's crazy, that it's probably not possible, but she brought life back to this farm, Sarah. To me." Sarah watched her old friend with affection. The change in Jack over the last few months was remarkable. The man who'd withdrawn into his grief after losing his family now smiled again, had a new light in his eyes, a renewed sense of purpose. Suddenly, a scream cut through the night. Jack was already on his feet and running before the sound had even finished, his body responding automatically to Emily's call. Sarah followed him to the bedroom, where they found the girl sitting up in bed, trembling. "Daddy," she cried when she saw Jack, stretching her arms out to him. Jack enveloped her in a protective hug, murmuring words of comfort. Sarah stood in the doorway, her heart aching at the sight. The way Emily clung to Jack, the way he cradled her gently, it was the perfect image of a father and daughter. Later, after Emily had fallen asleep again, Jack and Sarah returned to the porch. The night was clear, the stars shining brightly over the quiet fields. "You're a wonderful father, Jack," Sarah said softly. Jack swallowed hard, feeling emotional. "I'm afraid, Sarah, afraid that one day someone will come for her and I'll have to let her go." "I know," Sarah replied, squeezing his arm gently, "but for now, she needs you, and you need her." The night passed peacefully, the stars standing guard over the sleeping farm. In her room, Emily dozed, her dreams now filled with sunflowers and magical stories, secure in the knowledge that her daddy was nearby, ready to chase away any fears that might appear. And on the porch, Jack Matthews, the once lonely farmer who had unexpectedly become a father again, made quiet plans for a future he could no longer imagine without his little Emily. The idea for the outing came on a particularly pleasant spring morning. The sun cast its golden light across the fields of the Matthews farm, and Sarah watched Emily playing in the yard, chasing butterflies with that pure joy only children possess. It was then she thought it might be time to expand the girl's horizons a bit. "She needs new clothes," Sarah argued with Jack later that day. "And it would be nice for her to have a different afternoon, do something special." Jack hesitated, his hands busy organizing tools in the barn. The thought of Emily being out of his sight, even for a few hours, made his stomach clench with anxiety he couldn't quite explain. "I'm not sure, Sarah. She's so well adjusted here." "Precisely," Sarah insisted. "She's safe and happy. A small trip won't change that. Besides, Millbrook is much bigger than Pine Creek. They have better stores, a lovely ice cream parlor." The mention of ice cream made Emily, who had been helping Jack sort little tools into a separate box, look up with interest. "Can we get ice cream, Sarah?" she asked, her blue eyes shining at the possibility. Sarah smiled. "Any flavors you want, sweetie?" Jack looked from one to the other, feeling his resistance melt away in the face of Emily's excitement. Her smile had that effect on him. Everything brightened when she was happy. "Millbrook is almost 2 hours away," he began, though his tone already suggested he was relenting. "And I'm an excellent driver," Sarah finished. "Plus, we're just going for some shopping, then ice cream, and we'll head right back. What could possibly go wrong?" Later, Jack would remember those words with a bitter irony that would haunt him for a long time. The next morning, the sun had barely risen, and Emily was already up, practically vibrating with excitement about the trip. Dressed in her best outfit, a light blue dress Sarah had brought, and her favorite little brown boots, she looked like a tiny farm princess. "Remember the rules?" Jack asked as he braided her hair, his calloused fingers surprisingly adept after months of practice. "Always stay close to Sarah," Emily recited solemnly. "Don't talk to strangers, and if I get lost, stay where I am and wait." "That's right," Jack said, kissing the top of her head. "And what else?" Emily turned to him, flashing a radiant smile that lit up the entire kitchen. "Love you a lot and come back soon." Jack hugged her tightly, fighting an unexplainable apprehension tightening his chest. It was silly, he knew. Sarah was perfectly capable of looking after Emily for a few hours. Still, there was something about that morning, maybe the way the wind blew, or how the shadows fell across the field, that made him uneasy. "Maybe I should go with you," he suggested for the third time, when Sarah arrived in her blue sedan. "Jack Matthews," Sarah said firmly, hands on her hips. "You've got a barn to fix, and I promise to help you with it tomorrow. Let us have our girls' afternoon in peace." Emily was already bouncing with excitement beside the car, her golden curls gleaming in the morning sun. "Please, Daddy, I promise I'll bring you back a surprise." The word Daddy was still new enough to make Jack's heart melt every time he heard it. It was a magic word that dissipated any worry, no matter how persistent. All right, he relented, helping Emily into the car. "But call me when you get there, okay?" "And every hour after that," promised Sarah, rolling her eyes affectionately at her friend's excessive concern. Jack stood in the dirt driveway, watching the blue car disappear around the bend. The sense of apprehension hadn't lessened, but he pushed it to the back of his mind. There was plenty of work to be done, and focusing on that would help him pass the time until Emily returned. The drive to Millbrook was filled with music and lively conversation. Emily was fascinated by the changing scenery, especially once they began seeing the first signs of the city, buildings taller than anything in Pine Creek, busy streets, colorful storefronts. "Look at all those stores," she exclaimed, her nose practically pressed to the car window. Sarah smiled, delighted by the child's enthusiasm. She found a parking spot near the main street and helped Emily out of the car. The city was especially busy that Saturday afternoon, with families shopping and tourists snapping photos of Millbrook's historic architecture. "First we buy what we need," Sarah announced, "then ice cream." "How does that sound?" Emily nodded cheerfully, holding Sarah's hand as they walked down the crowded sidewalk. Her eyes took in every detail, with a mix of fascination and something else, something Sarah couldn't quite pinpoint. It was as if a flash of recognition sometimes crossed Emily's face, only to fade away a moment later. Their first stop was a children's clothing store. Emily, who usually displayed a surprisingly sophisticated taste, was oddly drawn to simple, practical pieces. "This is perfect for helping Daddy on the farm," she said, holding up a pair of overalls embroidered with flowers. Sarah's heart tightened at the remark. It was remarkable how Emily had fully embraced life on the farm, how she had thrown herself wholeheartedly into her new reality with Jack. Sometimes it was hard to imagine that this same girl had appeared mysteriously in the middle of a snowstorm just a few months earlier. After picking out some new clothes, including the overalls, they headed to a bookstore. Emily immediately made a beeline for the children's section, her eyes shining at the colorful shelves. "Can I pick a book for Daddy to read me at bedtime?" she asked, already examining the options carefully. "Of course, honey," Sarah replied, watching as Emily ran her tiny fingers over the spines of the books with a care and reverence that seemed beyond her years. It was as they left the bookstore that everything started to go wrong. The window display of a toy store across the street caught Emily's attention. It was nothing extraordinary, just a standard setup with teddy bears and wooden trains. But something about it made Emily let go of Sarah's hand and dash toward the display. "Emily, wait!" Sarah shouted, but her voice was swallowed by the city noise. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. A group of tourists walked between them, momentarily blocking Sarah's view. When the path cleared again, Emily was gone. Panic was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah spun around in all directions, her eyes frantically scanning the crowd for the familiar golden curls. "Emily!" she yelled, desperation lacing her voice. "Emily!" People began to stop, some offering help, others merely watching with curiosity. Sarah barely registered them, racing back and forth across the street, peering into every store, calling Emily's name over and over. With trembling hands, she grabbed her phone and dialed Jack's number. Each ring seemed to last an eternity, her mind already conjuring 1,000 terrible scenarios. "Sarah?" Jack's concerned voice came through the phone. "What happened?" "Jack," her voice broke, tears streaming down her face. "Emily, I lost her. She was right here, and then—" "What?" Terror was palpable in Jack's voice. "What do you mean you lost her?" "She saw something in a window. Let go of my hand for just a second. Jack, I'm so sorry. I'm on my way," he cut in, and she could hear movement on the other end. "Keep looking. I'll be there as fast as I can." Sarah continued her frantic search, now joined by a few local shopkeepers and sympathetic passers-by who offered to help. The police were called, and soon squad cars began circulating the area. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, Robert and Mary Chen were leaving their favorite bakery when they spotted a small, solitary figure on the sidewalk. The girl was clearly lost, her blue eyes wide with fear as she looked around. "Look," Mary murmured, squeezing her husband's arm. "Isn't that—" Robert was already reaching for his phone, quickly opening his browser. There it was, the photo that had dominated the news for weeks. Emily Blackwood, the missing heiress. The face was unmistakable, even with the simple clothes she was wearing now, so different from the fancy outfits in the news images. "Excuse me, sweetie," Mary approached Emily gently. "Are you lost?" Emily nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I can't find Sarah." "It's okay," Mary assured her, crouching down to Emily's level. "We'll help you find her." Robert was already dialing the hotline set up for information about Emily. In a matter of minutes, news that the Blackwood heiress had been found spread like wildfire. Back at the Blackwood mansion, William was in a video conference when his assistant burst into the office without knocking, something that hadn't happened in 15 years of employment. "Mr. Blackwood," she said breathlessly, "they've found her. Emily is in Millbrook." William spilled his coffee, barely noticing the hot liquid soaking his important documents. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure." "Yes, sir, a couple found her. The police are already there and—" But William was already moving, phone in hand. "Get the helicopter ready," he ordered, "and find Olivia immediately." Jack Matthews drove his old pickup far beyond the speed limit, his heart pounding so hard it almost drowned out the engine's roar. A drive that normally took 2 hours, he intended to do in much less. "Please," he murmured repeatedly, his hands white-knuckling the steering wheel, "please let her be all right." When he finally reached Millbrook, he found the main street in complete chaos. Police cars blocked several intersections, and a crowd of curious onlookers and journalists had gathered outside a cafe. Sarah found him before he could fully park, running to the truck with tear-stained cheeks. "Jack, they found her. She's—" Where? He interrupted, already jumping from the vehicle. Inside the cafe. But Jack, there's something you should know. He was already sprinting, pushing his way through the crowd. Officers tried to stop him, but Sarah shouted, explaining who he was, and they let him pass. Inside the cafe, Emily sat at a table, sipping hot chocolate under the watchful eyes of a middle-aged couple and several police officers. The instant she saw him, her eyes lit up. "Daddy!" she yelled, jumping from her chair and racing toward him. Jack scooped her up, hugging her tightly, tears streaming down his face. "Don't ever do that to me again, little one. Never again." That was when he heard the sound of approaching helicopter rotors, and the buzz of the crowd outside increased considerably. "Mr. Matthews!" Jack turned, still holding Emily, to find a police officer wearing a serious expression. "Yes? Sir, we need to talk. It's about Emily's true identity." Just then, the cafe doors opened, and a couple hurried in. The man was tall and commanding, with grey hair and a suit that probably cost more than Jack's entire farm. The woman was elegant and delicate, bearing the same golden curls as Emily. Emily, still in Jack's arms, went rigid. Her tiny fingers clutched his shirt more tightly, her eyes wide as they locked on the newcomers. "Emily," the woman's voice trembled. "Oh my God, it's really you." "Mommy." Emily's voice was barely a whisper, filled with confusion and uncertainty. Jack felt his entire world crumble at that single word. Of course, how had he not realized before? Emily's refined manners, her knowledge of things far removed from simple farm life, the nightmares. "Mr. Matthews," the officer said quietly, "allow me to introduce William and Olivia Blackwood, Emily's parents." Emily began trembling in Jack's arms, her small hands gripping him even more. Her next whispered words broke everyone's heart. But Jack is my daddy, too." The silence that followed was so dense you could cut it with a knife. William Blackwood took a step forward, his eyes studying both his daughter and the man holding her. "Mr. Matthews," he began, his voice controlled but sincere, "there aren't enough words to express our gratitude. You saved and cared for our daughter when we—" "Please," Jack interrupted softly. "You don't have to. I only did what anyone would have done." "No," Olivia said, stepping forward cautiously. "Not everyone would have opened their heart and their home like that. How Emily? She's so well looked after." Emily glanced from her biological parents back to Jack, clearly struggling to process the situation. "I don't want to leave," she declared suddenly, tightening her hold around Jack. "I want to stay with Daddy Jack on the farm." Pain flickered across Olivia's face, but before she could respond, the cafe doors opened again. Rachel Morgan entered, as elegant as ever in her Chanel ensemble. "Thank heavens," she exclaimed. "I came as soon as I heard—" The reaction was immediate. Emily let out a small, frightened gasp and buried her face against Jack's neck, her entire body trembling. "The mean aunt," she whispered so softly that only Jack heard. A cold shiver ran down Jack's spine. The puzzle pieces were starting to fit together. Emily's nightmares, her inexplicable fear, the mystery of how she'd ended up on his farm that snowy night. William and Olivia exchanged worried glances, clearly noticing Emily's reaction. Rachel paused in her tracks, her expression shifting from concern to something else, something that made Jack's protective instincts flare. Perhaps Sarah, who had been quietly observing, suggested, "We should give Emily a bit of space. It's been an intense day." "Yes," Olivia agreed quickly. "We don't have to figure everything out right now. The important thing is that our daughter is safe and so well cared for," William added, giving Jack a meaningful look. "Mr. Matthews, we'd very much like to speak with you further, understand how all this happened." Jack nodded, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He loved Emily as though she were his own child, but he knew he had no legal right to her. Still, her reaction to Rachel worried him deeply. "The farm isn't far," he offered. Maybe we could continue this conversation there. It would be quieter for Emily." The Blackwoods agreed readily, showing a consideration that surprised Jack. Rachel began to protest, but Olivia cut her off gently. "Rachel, dear, why don't you head back to the mansion? We'll organize everything there for Emily's return." Something, a flash of anger, frustration, passed across Rachel's face, but she recovered her composure quickly. Of course. Family first, right? As Rachel left, Jack felt Emily relax slightly in his arms. The child looked at him and then at her parents. "Can we all go see the sunflowers we planted?" she asked timidly. "They're almost blooming." "Sure we can, little one," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. Olivia discreetly wiped away a tear, watching the obvious connection between her daughter and the farmer. William placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. As the group prepared to leave the cafe, Jack fought to steady his swirling emotions. He knew the right thing to do was to return Emily to her true parents. They had the legal right, and they'd raised her from birth. But his heart broke at the thought of losing her. The afternoon sun was already sinking as they left the city, forming a small caravan. Jack's pickup with Emily still in his arms and Sarah at the wheel, followed by the Blackwoods car. On the horizon, dark clouds gathered, promising a storm. It was as if the sky itself mirrored the emotional storm everyone faced. The love of two parents for their child, Emily's fear and confusion, the still unrevealed secrets behind her disappearance, and the unsettling shadow of her reaction to her aunt. Jack knew the coming hours would be crucial. Tough decisions had to be made, painful truths faced. For now, he simply held Emily a little closer, feeling her small heart beat against his chest, silently praying that somehow everything would work out. The library of the Blackwood mansion had turned into a sort of command center over the last 48 hours. Malcolm Richards, the lead investigator, had set up his base there, converting the elegant mahogany desk into a surface covered with reports, photographs, and detailed timelines. The morning was grey, matching the tense atmosphere within the mansion. Emily had spent the night in her old bedroom, but only after Jack agreed to stay in a guest room on the same floor. The bond between the farmer and the little girl was simply too strong to ignore, and the Blackwoods, despite their obvious heartbreak, had been surprisingly understanding. "Ms. Thompson," Malcolm began, adjusting his glasses as he consulted his notes, "could you tell us more about how Mr. Matthews cared for Emily during these months?" Sarah sat rigidly in one of the leather armchairs, her hands clasped in her lap. William and Olivia Blackwood occupied the sofa near the fireplace, while Jack stood by the window, occasionally glancing at the garden where Emily played under the watchful eyes of two security guards. "Jack was the father Emily needed at that moment," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. "He reorganized his entire life to care for her. He transformed his late son's old bedroom, a son he lost, I might add, into a safe space for Emily. He learned to braid hair, to make fun breakfasts, to tell bedtime stories." Olivia discreetly dabbed a tear. The devotion this stranger had shown their daughter was simultaneously comforting and painful. "What about the nightmares?" Malcolm asked. "You mentioned Emily had them frequently." "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "In the beginning, almost every night. Jack would spend hours comforting her, singing lullabies, making hot chocolate until she calmed down." "Did she say what frightened her in these nightmares?" Sarah hesitated, exchanging a look with Jack. "It was always something about being lost in the cold, about running from something or someone." Malcolm jotted more notes. "Did she ever specifically mention how she ended up at the farm?" "Not exactly," Jack said, finally stepping away from the window. "But there were moments, little things she'd say or do." A sudden shout from the garden interrupted him. Everyone rushed to the window, but it soon became clear that Emily had only been startled by something during play. Still, something in that scene caught Jack's attention. "She's doing it again," he muttered. "Doing what?" Malcolm asked, instantly alert. "That motion with her hands, like she's shielding herself from something. She did it during her nightmares, too." Olivia stepped closer to the window, watching her daughter with new eyes. "It's true. She used to do that when she was smaller, especially when—" Her voice failed her, and William finished, "when Rachel was around." A heavy silence hung in the library. It was broken by the sound of the door opening, and Grace, Emily's former nanny, entered carrying a tray of tea. "Pardon me," she said softly. "I thought everyone might want something to drink." As Grace poured the tea, Malcolm took the opportunity to shift his questions. "Ms. Wilson, you were with Emily the day she disappeared, correct?" Grace nodded, her hands trembling slightly around the teacup. "Yes, we were in the sunroom. were in the... Emily was playing with her dolls, and I answered that phone call. About your daughter being in the hospital, Malcolm filled in. Yes, but then we found out Amanda was never at the hospital that day. William straightened in his chair. What do you mean? I called Amanda afterward when everything happened. She was perfectly fine at home. She never called me. Malcolm exchanged a significant look with William. And did you mention this to anyone at the time? I told the police, but they didn't seem to take it seriously. Movement in the garden drew everyone's attention again. Emily had stopped playing and stood frozen, staring at something. Jack recognized that expression. It was the same she got when memories were surfacing. I'll get her, he said, already heading for the door. In the garden, Emily remained still, her eyes fixed on a specific spot near the fountain. When Jack approached, she spoke without looking away. It was here. What was here, little one? Where she took me, Emily answered in a strangely distant voice. I was playing with my dolls. Grace went to answer the phone, and then... Jack crouched beside her, noticing the others had followed him out and were observing with palpable tension. What happened then, Emily? Olivia asked gently, drawing closer with caution. She said she had a surprise for me, that we were going on a special trip. Emily frowned, as though struggling to recapture the memory. She was wearing that strong perfume that always makes me sneeze. William and Olivia exchanged alarmed glances. Only one person in the family wore a perfume that caused Emily to react like that. Sweetheart, William said calmly, despite the storm of emotion in his chest. Can you remember who it was? Emily began to answer, but then her eyes flicked toward the glass doors leading to the sunroom. Rachel stood inside and watching them. The moment Emily and Rachel locked eyes, Emily flung herself into Jack's arms, trembling. Don't let her take me again, she whispered, her voice trembling against Jack's chest. Please, Daddy, don't let her. The word Daddy was clearly meant for Jack, not William. But nobody seemed to mind at that moment. Emily's visceral reaction was proof enough that something very wrong had happened in that garden months ago. Malcolm gave a discreet signal, and two of his assistants began to move casually toward the sunroom doors. Rachel, sensing the shift in atmosphere, backed away into the mansion. I think we need to continue this conversation somewhere more private, Malcolm suggested. Everyone agreed silently. Jack carried Emily, who refused to let go of his shirt, back into the mansion. Sarah followed closely, her protective instincts in high gear. In the library, Emily finally began to relax, especially after Sarah made her some hot chocolate, a familiar source of comfort from her routine at the farm. That was when Olivia had an idea. Emily, honey, she began gently, would you like to look at some photo albums? We have lots of pictures of you when you were younger. Emily hesitated, but then nodded, still clinging to Jack's hand. Olivia brought out several elegant albums, and soon they were all sitting comfortably, flipping through the pages. It was at one Christmas photo in particular that everything changed. Taken 2 years prior, it showed the entire family in front of a lavishly decorated tree. What stood out wasn't the fancy decor or the pile of presents. It was the way Rachel looked at William from the corner of the frame. That look, Emily said suddenly, her voice small but clear. She always looked at Daddy William like that when Mum wasn't watching. Olivia paled, her hands trembling on the album pages. William looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. Memories of small moments and seemingly innocent comments and coincidental meetings suddenly taking on a new and disturbing significance. Malcolm watched carefully, taking mental notes. The emerging picture was unsettling. A long-held obsession, a fake phone call, conveniently malfunctioning security cameras, a missing child. Mr. Blackwood, he said discreetly, I believe we should discuss additional security measures. William nodded stiffly, his expression a mask of shock and betrayal. How had he not noticed? How had he allowed someone so close? A clap of thunder sounded in the distance, making Emily shrink closer to Jack. Sarah immediately began humming softly, another comforting ritual from the farm, and Emily relaxed a bit. No one will hurt you, Jack promised, kissing the top of her head. Never again. Olivia watched the interaction with a mix of gratitude and pain. This man, this stranger, had become a safe harbor for her daughter in a way she herself was still struggling to be. But now wasn't the time for jealousy or resentment. Now was the time to protect Emily. "Malcolm," she called, her voice steady despite held-back tears, "I want my sister out of this house, immediately." "Already taken care of," he replied. "Two of my men are discreetly monitoring her every move as we speak." Upstairs, utterly unaware of the storm brewing below, Rachel Morgan methodically packed a small suitcase. Her movements were calm, controlled, but her eyes held a disturbing gleam as she occasionally glanced out the window at the group in the garden. The truth was coming to light, piece by piece, memory by memory. And with it, a frightening question lingered. How far would Rachel go to keep her secrets buried? Jack pulled Emily a little closer in his arms, his protective instinct at full throttle. The girl he'd found lost in the snow, who had brought light back into his life, now needed him more than ever. And he was determined not to fail her. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on Jack's shoulder, silently communicating her support. Together, they had created a safe haven for Emily on the farm. Now, they would help her face the ghosts of her past. William and Olivia approached, sitting on either side of Jack and Emily. In that moment, all social barriers, all differences between their worlds, disappeared. They were just people who loved a little girl, united in their desire to keep her safe. The storm finally broke outside, but in the Blackwood Mansion library, Emily was secure, surrounded by people who would give their lives to protect her. The painful truths being revealed would be faced together, as a family. Not the family anyone might have expected or planned, but the family fate, in its unpredictable wisdom, had created. The storm that had threatened all day finally unleashed on the Blackwood Mansion. Thunder echoed through the ancient halls, as if the house itself shuddered in anticipation of the revelations to come. Emily was curled in Jack's lap, her tiny fingers gripping his shirt as she stared at the rain through the mansion's tall library windows. Sarah sat nearby, offering the comforting presence that had become so familiar in recent months. William and Olivia took up the sofa beside them, trying to mask their anxiety, while Malcolm Richards organized his documents on the mahogany desk. The click of high heels on the marble corridor shattered the tense calm. Emily instantly tensed, and before anyone could speak, her terrified whisper spilled out, "It was her. Aunt Rachel took me." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel stood at the library door, as elegant as ever in her Chanel outfit, but something in her expression had shifted. It was as if a mask had begun to slip, revealing something much darker underneath. "Emily, dear," Rachel said, her voice still attempting that syrupy sweetness that now rang hollow to everyone present. "Whatever are you talking about?" "You said you had a surprise," Emily continued, her voice growing stronger now that the memories were finally resurfacing. "That we were going on a special trip. But then it got so cold and I was scared." Rachel took a step into the library but stopped when two of Malcolm's assistants discreetly positioned themselves near the door. "Emily," Malcolm said gently but firmly, "can you tell us more about that day?" The girl nodded, still clinging tightly to Jack, yet meeting her aunt's eyes directly. "It was snowing. Grace had gone to answer the phone. Aunt Rachel said Mommy had asked her to take me somewhere special." "This is ridiculous," Rachel interjected, but her voice had lost its studied softness. "Olivia, you can't possibly believe this." "The phone," Olivia said slowly, the puzzle pieces clicking into place in her mind. "The fake call to Grace, and that was you." Rachel laughed, a high, humorless sound. "You've always been so slow on the uptake, haven't you, little sister? Just like when you failed to notice that William and I—" "Rachel," William's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Don't you dare! Don't I dare!" Rachel turned on him, years of bitterness and obsession finally spilling over. "I've loved you for 20 years, William. Ever since Olivia introduced us in college, I was perfect for you, smart, sophisticated, ambitious, but you chose her. Sweet, innocent Olivia, who didn't even know how to appreciate wine properly." Olivia had gone pale, recalling subtle slights over the years that were now revealing their true meaning. The subtly malicious comments, the way Rachel always seemed to appear when William was alone, the overly elaborate gifts. "So you kidnapped our daughter?" Olivia asked, her voice shaking. Out of jealousy. Kidnapping is such an ugly word, Rachel sneered, a smile devoid of warmth. I just wanted you to feel a bit of the pain I've felt all these years, watching you live the life that should have been mine. The mansion, the perfect husband, the adorable little girl. How could you? William stood, his voice tight with fury. Emily is an innocent child. She could have died in that snow. Oh, please, Rachel rolled her eyes. I had everything planned, a discreet country house, far from everything. Emily would have been well looked after until you realized Olivia wasn't the perfect wife you thought, that she couldn't even protect her own daughter. But I got lost, Emily interrupted, her voice quiet but determined. You stopped the car to take a phone call, and I was so scared, so I ran. Rachel's composure fractured further. You weren't supposed to run. Everything was perfect. Fake phone call, security cameras, even a replacement nanny for when Olivia inevitably had a breakdown. Ms. Morgan, Malcolm said firmly, signaling to his assistants, we can continue this conversation at the police station. It was as if something finally snapped in Rachel. In a swift motion, she pulled a small revolver from her handbag, something no one had realized she was carrying. No, she screamed, her carefully maintained mask of sophistication dissolving. You don't understand. It was supposed to be perfect. William would finally see that Olivia wasn't good enough for him, that I was always the right choice. Everything happened very quickly after that. Malcolm's assistants moved with professional efficiency, disarming Rachel before she could do something irreversible. Emily buried her face against Jack's chest, and he shielded her instinctively with his body, while Sarah stood protectively in front of them. As the police officers handcuffed Rachel, she kept shouting, her voice oscillating between rage and pleading, William, please, everything I did was for you. It was always for you. Get her out of here, William ordered, his tone icy, and see to it she never comes near my family again. When Rachel was finally removed from the library, a heavy silence settled over the room. Olivia trembled, shocked by the depth of her own sister's betrayal. William embraced her, his own face contorted by guilt and horror. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have seen... No, Olivia said softly. None of us realized. She was my sister. I never imagined... Emily finally lifted her head from Jack's chest, looking at her parents with tear-filled eyes. You're not mad at me for running. Oh, my love, Olivia said, stepping closer and kneeling beside the chair where Jack held Emily. You were so brave. If you hadn't run, if Jack hadn't found you... The mention of Jack brought another reality to the forefront. Emily clung to him again, as though sensing the upcoming changes. I don't want to leave Daddy Jack, she cried, tears coursing down her cheeks. William and Olivia exchanged glances. Over the past few weeks, they had witnessed firsthand the special bond between their daughter and the farmer, who had rescued her and raised her during those crucial months. Emily, sweetheart, William began gently, Jack has become a very important part of your life. We see that, and we will always be grateful to him for taking such good care of you. But you're going to take me away, she sobbed. We don't have to decide everything right now, Sarah interjected in a soothing tone. It's been a very intense day for everyone. Jack Wu, who had remained silent through Rachel's confession, finally spoke. Emily, little one, look at me. She raised her tear-stained face. Your parents love you very much, he continued, fighting to keep his voice steady. They never stopped looking for you, never gave up hope of finding you. And now that they finally have... But I love you too, she said, cutting him off. And I love you more than anything, he managed, voice trembling. Which is exactly why we have to figure out what's best for you. William took a step closer, an idea forming in his mind. Mr. Matthews, Jack... Perhaps we can find a way for Emily not to have to choose between her families. Olivia immediately grasped her husband's thought. Isn't the property next to your farm for sale? Jack blinked, surprised. Yes, but we've always wanted a country house, William went on. A place where Emily could grow up knowing more than ballrooms and social events. What if we buy that property, Olivia concluded, as a second home? That way, Emily can spend time with both families. The best of both worlds. No one had considered that possibility before. It was a plan allowing Emily to maintain her connections to both worlds that were now part of who she was. You would do that?" Jack asked, voice thick with emotion. "After everything you've done for our daughter?" Olivia smiled through her tears. "It's the least we can do." Emily glanced from one adult to another, hope replacing fear in her eyes. "So I can have both, the mansion and the farm, all of you?" "Yes, my love," William said, stroking her golden curls. "You can have all of us." Sarah discreetly wiped a tear, watching how love for one small child had united people from such different worlds. Jack still held Emily, but his embrace felt different now. Not the desperate grip of someone afraid to lose something precious, but the secure touch of someone confident he would always have a place in her life. The storm outside began to calm, as if nature itself recognized that the hardest truths had already been laid bare. Rachel was on her way to the police station to face the consequences of her actions. But here, in the library of the Blackwood mansion, a new family was forming. An unconventional family, united not by blood or documents, but by something far stronger: love, understanding, and a genuine desire to make a child happy. Emily finally relaxed fully in Jack's arms, the exhaustion of the intense day beginning to catch up with her. Her eyes grew heavy, but a faint smile crossed her lips, the smile of someone who was truly at peace at last. "I think it's time someone went to bed," Sarah said softly. "Can I hear a story?" Emily asked drowsily. "One of Daddy Jack's stories about the stars." "Of course you can, little one," Jack replied, exchanging a meaningful look with William and Olivia. "And maybe your parents would like to listen too." The invitation was more than just a bedtime story. It was an offer to share, to merge two worlds that until that moment had seemed incompatible. William and Olivia accepted with grateful smiles. As the small group climbed the stairs toward Emily's room, Malcolm watched from the library, finishing his notes. In all his years of investigation, he had seen many cases end in tragedy. It was comforting, he thought, to witness one in which, despite all the pain and betrayal, a path toward healing and love had been found. The last light of day seeped through the mansion's windows, painting everything in soft golden hues. Somewhere in the city, Rachel faced the beginning of a long path of legal consequences. But here, in this moment, a different kind of family gathered to listen to stories of the stars, and how sometimes the most unexpected paths can lead us exactly where we need to be. Spring was in full bloom, turning the fields into an endless tapestry of wildflowers. At the old Thompson farm, now owned by the Blackwoods, the sound of hammers and power saws filled the air as renovations continued at a steady pace. What had once been a neglected property was gradually transforming into something new and special, a place that would unite two seemingly incompatible worlds. William Blackwood, surprisingly casual in jeans and a long-sleeved shirt, oversaw the installation of large French windows that would offer a view of the wheat fields belonging to Jack's neighboring farm. His hands, normally used only for paperwork and luxurious pens, now bore a few calluses, badges of honor for his personal involvement in the project. "The sunset is going to be amazing from here," he remarked, as Jack approached carrying wooden planks. "Emily's always loved colors." "Indeed," Jack answered, smiling at the mere mention of the little girl who had so completely changed his life. "She has a special way of describing every shade in the sky. Last night, she told me the clouds looked like cotton candy dipped in gold." William chuckled, recognizing his daughter's vivid imagination. "She's always had a knack for words. When she was smaller, he hesitated. Before all this happened, she'd make up elaborate stories about the paintings in the mansion." The two men shared a moment of silent understanding. The month since Rachel's arrest had been a period of adjustment for everyone, but also of healing and surprising discoveries. The idea to buy the Thompson farm had arisen during one of those late-night talks, when everyone was searching for a way to make the new family dynamic work. "Daddy! Daddy Jack!" The beloved, familiar voice rang out across the field, and both men turned automatically. Emily came running, golden curls shining in the sun, followed by Olivia and Sarah carrying picnic baskets. "We brought lunch," she announced, throwing herself first into Jack's arms and then rushing to hug William. The ease with which she flowed between her two families testified to how well things had settled in recent months. "And from the smell," Jack said, theatrically sniffing the air and making Emily giggle. "Sarah made that apple pie you love so much." "With extra cinnamon," Sarah confirmed, winking at Emily. "And I also brought that special cheese William likes. Olivia showed me where to find it." That was how it went now. Small kindnesses and gestures of consideration that flowed naturally among them, building bridges between their two different worlds. The farm renovation project had become a symbol of that unlikely but harmonious union. Olivia, surprisingly talented at blending rustic and elegant interior design, combined refined elements with the cozy simplicity of country life. Sarah contributed her practical knowledge about local quirks and the changing seasons. Jack offered vital expertise on the land and its maintenance, while William used his organizational skills to keep everything on schedule. And Emily, well, Emily was the heart of it all. Her infectious enthusiasm and her ability to find magic in the simplest things made the project an adventure for everyone involved. "Look what I found in the field," she exclaimed, opening her small backpack. From inside, she carefully pulled out an empty bird's nest. "Can we put it on a shelf in my new room?" "For decoration." "How about we put it on the porch instead?" Olivia suggested gently. "That way, maybe the birds can use it again next spring." Emily considered this with all the gravity she gave to the important decisions in her life. "Okay, but then I need to draw it first so I won't forget how pretty it is." "How about we do that after lunch?" Sarah proposed, already setting up the meal on the newly extended porch, unfinished but hinting at future beauty. They all sat down together, Emily happily bouncing between Jack's and William's laps, sharing stories about her week in the city and her elaborate plans for the garden she wanted to create. "Can we plant sunflowers like the ones at Daddy Jack's farm?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "And also those purple flowers Mommy likes, what are they called again?" "Lavender," Olivia replied, exchanging a smile with Jack. "And maybe some rose bushes too." "The white ones that glow under the moonlight," Emily exclaimed, "and we can hang a swing on that big tree. Daddy Jack makes the best swings." This was her new normal, a perfect blend of the sophisticated environment she once knew and the simple joys she discovered on the farm. Weekends spent at the farm had become a sacred tradition, with William and Olivia learning to appreciate the peace of country life. Jack, for his part, was now a regular presence at the family's events in the city. His natural kindness and sincerity had won over even the most skeptical of the Blackwoods social circle. At the last charity gala, Emily had insisted on having her first dance with him, to the delight of photographers. "I just remembered something," Emily suddenly exclaimed, jumping from William's lap. "I made a drawing of the new house, how it will look when it's finished. Want to see?" She raced to her backpack and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. The drawing depicted the farm with surprising detail: new French windows, an expanded porch, even sunflowers that hadn't been planted yet. "I see you included a new stable," William noted, studying the picture. Emily bit her lip, glancing hopefully at her parents. "It's just, well, I was thinking, since we'll spend so much time here." "You want a pony," Olivia concluded, laughing softly. "Only if it can be like Miss Beatrice," Emily quickly added, referring to the gentle mare at the neighboring farm. "I think we can consider that," William said, exchanging meaningful looks with the other adults. "But let's finish the house first, okay?" Emily agreed solemnly, though her eyes still glowed at the idea. After lunch, she convinced Jack to take her to his farm to feed the chickens, a routine she refused to give up, even with all the changes in her life. William and Olivia watched from the new porch, their hearts full of gratitude for the man who had not only saved their daughter's life, but had also become an essential member of their family. "She's so happy," Olivia said, observing Emily laugh at something Jack said while they scattered chicken feed. "Sometimes I wonder if we would have ever found her without him." "It's best not to think about that," William replied, taking her hand. "What matters is that she's here now, with more love in her life than we ever could have imagined." Sarah joined them, carrying a pitcher of fresh lemonade. "Sometimes the best families are the ones we create, not the ones we're born into," she said softly, a statement that carried special weight after Rachel's betrayal. The rest of the afternoon passed in a gentle atmosphere of joy. Emily ran through the wildflower-filled fields, occasionally bringing impromptu bouquets for each adult. Jack demonstrated a few carpentry tricks to William, while Olivia and Sarah discussed plans for a shared garden between the two properties. As the sun set, painting the sky in the exact stunning colors William had predicted, they gathered for an outdoor dinner. The table was set on the grass, with garden lanterns providing a soft, welcoming glow. "I think it's time to share our news," William said, clearing his throat after everyone had finished dessert. "Jack, Sarah, we'd like to invite you to spend Christmas with us this year, at the mansion." Emily clapped her hands in delight, almost knocking over her glass of juice. "Please say yes, there'll be a huge tree and we can decorate it all together. And Daddy Jack can help me make Christmas cookies like last year." Jack and Sarah exchanged emotional glances. Being invited to join one of the Blackwood's most important family traditions meant more than words could express. "It would be an honor," Jack replied, his voice husky with emotion. "And I promise not to burn the cookies this time," Sarah teased, prompting laughter and easing the emotional weight of the moment. Night settled gently, with stars starting to appear in the dark sky and fireflies dancing above the fields like little floating lanterns. Emily Soon, who had spent the last hour demonstrating star-spotting techniques to William, skills learned from Jack, finally began to doze in Jack's lap. It was time to decide where she would sleep, at her parents' newly renovated farm or at Jack's familiar home. These choices had become easier over time, with Emily naturally alternating between the two places, depending on her mood and the next day's activities. "Can I sleep at Daddy Jack's farm tonight?" she asked, already half asleep. "Then tomorrow at the new house. I want to help pick the color for my room." "Of course you can, sweetheart," William answered, kissing her forehead. He no longer held any insecurity in his voice when he agreed to such requests, only gratitude that his daughter had so much love in her life. Jack carried her through the fields under the moonlight, followed by everyone else. In her room, kept exactly as it was since the day she arrived, Emily snuggled under the covers, still hugging her favorite plush bunny. "Good night, Mommy and Daddy," she murmured, giving William and Olivia goodnight kisses. "Good night, Daddy Jack and Aunt Sarah." "Sleep tight, my love," Olivia whispered, tucking her in. "Sweet dreams, little one," Jack added, the same ritual they'd followed since her first nights with him. As Emily drifted off to sleep, a soft smile on her lips, the adults gathered on Jack's porch. The future stretched out before them like the fields in the moonlight, vast, full of possibility and the promise of happy days. Sarah served coffee, and they stayed there, talking quietly and enjoying the stillness of the night. Somewhere nearby, a cricket began its evening serenade, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. The full moon bathed the scene in a silvery glow, making the garden lanterns look like fallen stars on the ground. In her room, Emily shifted in her sleep, hugging her plush bunny closer, a sweet smile on her lips as she dreamed of the adventures tomorrow would bring. And so, under that starry spring sky, the miracle that had begun in a snowy field reached its most perfect conclusion. Not an ending, but a new beginning. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories aren't the ones that end with happily ever after, but those that show us happiness can be found in the most unexpected places, and that true love has the power to create families that transcend all conventions. Emily now had 2 homes, 2 sets of parents, and more love than any heart could ask for. And in the end, wasn't that what truly mattered? Not the blood that ran in her veins, but the love that filled her heart. Not the names on her birth certificate, but the people who chose every day to be part of her life. The wind whispered through the wheat fields, carrying with it the promise of brighter days ahead. And on 2 neighboring farms, united by one small girl with golden curls and a heart big enough to love them all, a remarkable family continued to grow, learn, and love, proving that real miracles happen not just once on a snowy night, but every day, in the small moments of love and understanding we share with those we choose to call family.